Welcome to the stream. It is comforting to think that the stuff that we throw away will be safely recycled. So why is Southeast Asia being deluged with waste plastic, paper and electronics imported from rich countries?
I'm Malika Bilal. Today we'll look at the impact an avalanche of imported rubbish is having on people's health and the environment across that region. You can join the conversation through Twitter and YouTube.
The journey of waste paper, plastic and cans doesn't always end at the local landfill or recycling plant. A growing proportion of contaminated material instead gets loaded onto boats and is shipped thousands of miles to Southeast Asian countries.
The region is an attractive market for scrap exporters in places such as the US, France and the UK. But now countries across Southeast Asia are rejecting shipments. Last week, Indonesia said no to 210 tons of waste paper from Australia, contaminated with hazardous material. In May, the Philippines shipped 69 containers of waste back to Canada after it had rotted in port for 5 years. That was as Malaysia's environment minister announced 3,000 tons of plastic waste would be sent back to 14 different countries.
Now we know that garbage, like what you see just now, is traded under the pretext of recycling. Malaysians, like any other developing countries, have a right to clean air, clean water, sustainable resources, and clean environment to live in, just like citizens of developed nations.
For a look at the impact of waste imports across Southeast Asia, we are joined by Leah Guerrero. She is country director at Greenpeace Philippines. She's in Quezon City.
Yuyun Ismawati is co-founder and senior advisor at Nexus 3 Foundation, an Indonesian environmental group. She joins us from Bangkok, Thailand.
From Chicago, we have Kate O'Neill. She's an associate professor at University of California, Berkeley. She's also author of the upcoming book, Waste, a study of how waste is managed around the world. Hello, everybody. Hello, ladies. It's good to have you with us. Going to start with something else that Kate's been writing. This is in the print. Feels like a revolution here, Kate. Let me just show everybody what I'm talking about here. One Asian country after another is shutting door on waste plastic from the US, UK, Australia. They're sending the rubbish back. And it seems to have started with China. Can you explain, Kate?
Yeah, it did start with China. I think we didn't really realize until 2017 that China had been taking in about half of the world's plastic scrap, particularly from the developed world, ostensibly for recycling. And on almost 2 years ago to the day, China announced that it was just going to stop importing all of this plastic. And we're talking huge quantities, hundreds of thousands of tons. And over the 20 years or so China had been doing this, very little of it had been recycled at home. We had stopped developing recycling facilities here in the US. So once China said, no, this is contaminated, we don't know what to do with it, the recycling industry kind of went into a spin here. And it was really a seismic shift, as a huge wake-up call for the international community in terms of what we do with our plastic and paper waste.
I'm just looking at certain pictures of waste being waste just lying around, actually. And then I'm just thinking, as we're going through this and looking at some of the pictures, Yuyun, what is it that is being recycled from the waste that we throw away? How is it done?
Yeah, it's interesting because the stuff that's shipped to developing countries, including to Indonesia, that was labeled as recyclables, actually it's not recyclables. Most of the packaging that we saw, and I saw it on the ground, it was labeled currently not recycled, or check your local council about recyclability. So it was a bit funny because when I saw the packaging with the signed recycling sign but crossed, it means it's not recyclables. So I wonder how the Philippine nations claim that recycling rate in their countries already reached 60% or 70%, but in fact, they shipped it to other countries to be recycled. Yes, that pictures was from the field that I went. I found lots of waste collected and separated by waste pickers.
And of course, this conversation begs the question for many people in our community on why the waste is going to these countries in the first place. So here's one view from H.G. Flores, who says it's a cheap source of labor that provides jobs to developing states. Those states can then sell recycled goods to turn a profit. If the developing nation can recycle the majority of waste, it's a mutually beneficial relationship between wealthy and developed nations and developing nations. So that is his take there on the reason why this is happening in the first place. But I want to share this with you from a resident of one of those nations. This is from the Jakarta Post. You see the headline there. Why do you always export your waste to my country? Indonesian preteen wrote this letter to the US President Trump. You can see the letter there. She spoke to the stream about what went behind this letter and what she's asking. Have a listen to what she told us.
Hi, I'm Nina. I'm 12 years old. I'm from East Java, Indonesia. I wrote a letter for President of United States of America to ask him stop exporting plastic waste to Indonesia. Plastic polluted our river and beaches. And now, my country is the second largest contributor to waste in the world. We have a lot of problems from our waste in my country. Please don't add more. USA should treat their own waste. Please don't send it to Indonesia. Please help me to make a better future. Take back your trash from Indonesia. Thank you.
Leah, it's hard not to want to do whatever she says in that video comment. But talk to us about what she said. She said the U.S. should treat their own waste, and it seems like a rational idea there. Why is the waste going to Southeast Asia?
Yeah, the waste is going to Southeast Asia because labor is cheaper to recycle it here than to process it back home. And that's the whole problem about all this waste importation that's going on, is that people in rich countries think that it's easier, cheaper to get rid of the waste in developing countries. But what it actually means is that it goes to recycling facilities that are crude, that can't recycle the waste properly, or they're not recycled at all, like Yuyun says.
Kate, is there a genuine business case of sending genuine recyclables from one country to another country? One country doesn't need it, another country could use it. Is there a genuine business case for this to happen?
Oh, it depends on the scrap you're looking at. I mean, there's been a long-term trade in aluminum, aluminum, steel, copper, other kinds of scrap that can't be reused efficiently here. I mean, in the US, we've effectively outsourced our manufacturing capacity as well as our recycling. So yeah, when you're talking that kind of scrap, absolutely. And I think that to that extent, yes, there always is a case for a global scrap trade if it's just going to be thrown out here. The scrap trade goes back to the 18th century.
Yeah, but if I may say,
yes,
that
Yuyun, go ahead.
in the developing countries, some of the recycling plants are actually not up to the standard because people just look for opportunities, economic opportunities. So when China shut the door and all the traders and brokers shipped all the waste to all the Southeast Asian nations, we are not prepared. So most of the recycling plants are actually brand new or pop up or just informal activities. So sometimes when experts said that their markets, actually they have to define what kind of market, because in reality, market is there, but actually it's not really prepared, not really built according to the standards.
Ladies, can I give our audience an example of what not being prepared looks like? So I want to show you something known as the plastic river, and you can see this. Have a look. Let's just roll the tape. I want you to see what we're looking at. This is the plastic river, known as the plastic river, in the Philippines. So the Philippines is grappling with its own waste issue. So the idea of taking on other countries' waste in bulk, how do you even do that, Leah?
It's crazy, actually. We take in waste from other countries, and a lot of it is illegally shipped. It's not like the Philippines does not have a recycling industry that's as big as in Malaysia, or Vietnam or Indonesia. We get shipped a lot of illegal waste. It only gets discovered when the containers are opened for random checks in the ports. But going back to the question you posed earlier about the business case of waste recycling and sending it to other countries, it's actually a flawed model because it doesn't take into account the externalities that happen, like the environmental costs of recycling, whether it's in a very, very crude facility. So there's a lot of environmental problems that happen with that kind of recycling, or whether it's in, for example, in cement kilns where the plastic waste gets burnt. There's a lot of environmental pollution, air pollution, and communities really are the ones that suffer.
Yeah. I mean, I would absolutely agree with that when it comes to those sorts of wastes, and I think it's just such a huge business for people to take advantage. I mean, you're talking about shipments going to the Philippines and being opened up. I mean, these shipments can be marked pretty much anything and easily slipped out of developed countries and just show up, and there's someone who'll pay for it. But then, we've seen cases throughout history that just gets dumped on people. In communities in Africa back in the 80s, people died directly from exposure to toxic waste from northern countries.
And our community is talking about what this means for the local communities where this waste is dumped. So Shiv on Twitter says, when plastic is burned, it releases dangerous chemicals, and these emissions are known to cause respiratory ailments and stress human immune systems, and they're potentially carcinogenic. Another person sent us a video comment on what this means, and she is Magaswari. She's a researcher at Friends of the Earth Malaysia, and here's what she told us.
Plastic waste trade and also recycling has caused tremendous impacts to the environment and communities in Southeast Asian countries. This is especially due to residual waste which has been brought in to Malaysia, and most of the waste that had come in were dirty, contaminated and mixed plastics which could not be recycled. So these were dumped and burnt in areas neighboring communities and has caused a lot of burden to our environment and also communities.
So Yuyun, when we talk about this, we're not just talking about the people who live close to these facilities, but also the people who have to work in the facilities. What do you know about that?
Yes, I've seen people in several villages in East Java and also around Jakarta, surprisingly. There are lots of activities of informal recycling activities where communities and villagers and the newly recyclers.
We've lost Yuyun there for a moment. We'll come back to her. I want to show you a couple of things that Yuyun, we missed you for a moment. Do pick up, carry on. You froze for a moment, carry on.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yes, I've seen that the new business open up because communities bought unwanted plastics from plastic recycling companies and paper recycling companies because it was smuggled between materials that imported by the companies. And the unwanted waste is actually also only utilized or sold by the communities, maybe only 20-30%, and the rest of it was just burned. And as we know that to make plastic, there are lots of chemicals needed as an additive. So when you burn plastics, actually you also burn toxic chemicals.
Kate,
Yep.
I just want to add and show our audience examples of we're talking about this. So this is a story that Al Jazeera has been working on for some time, and we just a couple of days ago went to Indonesia to talk to a fish farmer, and there were just tiny little bits of plastic that he was finding in his fish, so in the food source. I want to play this clip, and then Kate, you pick up from the clip. Let's have a look first of all.
Muyi has been working in the aquaculture industry for 15 years. More and more of his work involves clearing rubbish.
Plastic pollution is a big problem. Every year the trash accumulates in the river, making it more and more shallow. It's really bad for the fish farms too.
Fish caught in plastic waste can suffocate. poor water quality also affects their growth. The government wants to cut plastic debris by 70% by 2025. But until that happens, plastic will continue to be on the menu for fish and us.
Okay, that's so disturbing. What other things should we be aware of from this dumping of trash and rubbish and then coming back to actually impact us?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I mean, I think in the last few years, as well as the waste trade, we've become even more aware of the problem of plastics in the oceans, which is not just traded plastics, but any and all plastics from so many coastal areas in the world based on all the plastic we produce. And we're really starting to understand how much that plastic is infiltrating marine life, the very bases of the food chain, and being carried up to humans, to the food that we eat, as well as all of that plastic that you see strewn around in coastal areas. To me, that is, seeing those pictures when I was young was the reason I became an environmentalist. And it's a problem that, along with climate change, we're leaving to our kids to deal with. But I think, unlike climate change, it is something we can do now. I mean, this is a problem we can solve if we really want to in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years.
And when it comes to solving this problem, Leah, I'll go to you with this, because when it comes to solving this problem, that's where the majority of people want to focus their comments on online. So this on Twitter, this is Sean, who says, these countries, meaning countries mostly in the West, need to take responsibility for their own rubbish. It is a disgusting practice and must stop. Ship it all back. And that is exactly what's happening. I'll share two headlines here. This one, this came out today, just this week, not a dustbin, Cambodia to send plastic waste back to the US and Canada. And of course, we've mentioned this one, Indonesia sends rubbish back to Australia, says it's too contaminated. That was earlier this month. On YouTube, we got a comment from someone who is excited about this and the possibility. Rahel says, I'm happy to see countries like Malaysia reject waste imports. It's about time the West and everyone deal with the consequences of their own environmentally harmful actions. Leah, is this the solution? Taking a stand, sending it back?
Agree. But beyond that, it's also what you mentioned in the first Twitter post. It's countries dealing with their own waste. And that's if there's anything that this whole waste trade issue is telling us, is that countries need to deal with their own waste at home. And that includes reduction of waste reduction, reduction of plastic production, ensuring that we don't produce things that are used only for a few seconds, a few minutes, and then thrown away, because that's the whole root of why this is all happening.
Leah, I've been looking at your Twitter feed, and you retweeted this from Break Free from Plastic. They're actually holding a convention right now, and you're talking about the source of the plastics here is perhaps the actual companies who are making the plastic. Maybe we go to the root, the source of the problem, rather than wait until it's already produced. That is one way of doing that. Are you seeing the industry, the plastics industry, changing in any way?
No. And that is the biggest stumbling block right now. So there's a lot of calls for not just the plastic industry, but also manufacturing companies, shampoo companies, soap companies, etc., to stop packaging their waste, their products in single-use plastic. So, for example, here in the Philippines, we have this thing called sachets, which is single-serve shampoo, single-serve food, etc., and it's all in disposable, throwaway plastic. So we're also, in Greenpeace, we're asking these companies to stop packaging their products in that kind of plastic. And I think, we're not getting a lot of response from the industry to minimize their plastic production and packaging their products in these containers. And it's a big loss, I think. It's the biggest stumbling block for countries to reduce their plastic waste. There's no regulation that requires companies not to package their waste in single-use plastic. So the production of single-use plastic goes on.
And yet there is at least some demand for it from consumers. Like you're saying, this person's watching us live on YouTube, working to be self-sufficient, that's their handle. And they say these companies need to start by making environmentally friendly materials, and then no trash would be sent anywhere. So that's one take on it. But I wanted to share a video comment from someone else, pretty prolific in this world. This is Priji Arasandi, and he started a local movement in Indonesia to stop industrial pollution from flowing into a local river. He's also the father of the young woman we saw at the very top of the show in that video comment. And here's what he told the stream.
It's been a new problem for us because we already have a problem with the waste, with the plastic waste, and then EU and US community, USA's put more plastic waste to Indonesia. This is, I think, is a new colonialization because it's difficult and expensive recycling the plastic, recycling the waste. USA didn't want dirty in their country, so they export waste to Indonesia. So please don't you export more plastic waste to Indonesia, please.
Don't do it. That's what he says.
Yeah.
Kate, he calls this colonialism.
Yeah, that has often been what has been said about a lot of environmental issues, that we export our pollution to the global south. And that's not just the waste. I think another piece of this is that even in the West, we had to be taught to use disposables. It was not something that we decided to do naturally back in the 50s. And I think that we've got instances where people all over the world are being told, you need to use plastic. This is the modern material. It keeps it safe. It keeps it clean. It looks great. Individual servings, so convenient. And I think that's something that's been inculcated around the world. And as a few people have said in the material you've shown so far, we're going to really need to focus on waste management and reduction and recycling.
You said it was possible to do within about. You said it was possible to fix this issue within 5 to 10 years.
Yes.
How?
The waste. Well, overall producing plastic, maybe that's going to take longer. But I think in terms of having a firm trajectory to get waste out of the ocean, to stop shipping them to where they're going to be, and even to develop, there are people internationally who are developing funding solutions or working in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. I can think of a group called Circulate Capital who are working really hard to establish sort of coastal waste management systems. So, I think the will is there. Do I think we automatically will? I think we can do this. I really think that people like my co-guests here are the people who are really going to push and get this done, as well as that gentleman and his daughter in Indonesia. So,
Yep.
Yeah. If I may say, sorry, Leah.
Leah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, you. And I think we're going to say the same thing.
Leah.
Yeah, I think it's not only colonialism, but also a backset for me, because we are going back to the 80s. It was the 80s where all the developing nations dumped all the waste in Africa. And that's how we started to have new conventions, Basel conventions, and all agreements, and promise that developed nations will not dump their waste into the developing countries. So now it's funny that we have more sophisticated lifestyles, we have more comfortable life, but actually our behaviors, the cultures, just set back to the 80s. That's ridiculous.
So that was you, and Leah, you were so polite. You now have one sentence to wrap us all up with. What is that one genius sentence? Go ahead.
I believe that it is waste colonization, this thing that's happening. But more than that, it's not just exporting waste. These countries are exporting their problems, things that they cannot solve. They cannot solve the problem of single-use plastic, and they are exporting it to developing countries, and that's really appalling. Yeah.
Leah, Yu, Kate, thank you so much for being with us today. Malika?
Closing thought from Kyle, who says, we are obsessed with overconsumption and convenience, and the majority of our population don't think critically about our waste. People forget about the reduce part of the 3 R's and forgive themselves because they recycle. So here are the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle.
And Kyle, you can't see it, but all 3 of our guests were nodding. Thank you for your input. Malika and I will see you always online at AJ Stream on Twitter. See you next time.